Captain.
Hi Harminder. How are you?
Hello. How
Uh,
are you? Just fine.
so we are the group for chapter 17, and the name of our chapter is Politics and Government. And well, here it goes. I'm going to share my screen for my PowerPoint. Hold on. It's not showing yet, is it?
No, it's not showing.
Okay, just 1 second. There. Okay, so I'm Mariel Andrade.
And I have Harminder Singh.
And today we're going to talk about, excuse me, I need to move my screen a little bit. We're going to talk about words like power, authority, revolution, politics, anarchism, war, and also not so happy words like terrorism, war, and state of exemption. And we're going to analyze authors like Thomas Hobbes, Aristotle, Weber, Marx and Engels, Foucault, Chomsky, McKinnon, Polutanzas. And we're also going to apply the sociological perspective in functional structuralism as a critical sociology with feminism and symbolic interactionism, right? We're going to start talking about power and authority. So what is political action? What is political about political action? What is the place for political in the ongoing conducts of life? That is the first key that sociologists are asking themselves when they are trying to understand this dynamic. And what comes up with Samuel Huntington in What's a Revolution is that revolution occurs often and that power does not come without revolution, right? And a revolution simply means a change that impacts profoundly in society, in governments, and in institutions. And it creates change. Um, with this, I summon Foucault with this quote that says that governmental power and authority are the various forms of resistance to being ruled. With this, what he means is that power does not exist without resistance. It is resistant who defines power and vice versa. Um, Explaining a little bit about who holds power, uh, Max Weber talks about politics as a vocation. And in this book, he explains that authority is just, and power are just a means of ruling people. So when you have power, you have the means of getting the collective do whatever you need them or want them to do. And it all has to do with perceived power. Mm. On the next book, we have Aristotle with politics. And in this book, he shows us how in ancient Greece, politics were mostly only referring as things that concerned the city. And whatever political action was to have a better life and a better functioning of the city. In contrast with with Max Weber in book number 3, who defines politics as an activity of striving to share power. On this one, Aristotle talks about already shared power equally. Nowadays, we don't have a polis. We have nation states, and right now there's 193 ones in the United Nations. Uh, Another wonderful book that you would like to read if you want to understand theoretical politics from 1600s would be Thomas Hobbes and the Leviathan, which established modern thought on the nature of sovereignty. Excuse me. So whatever Thomas Hobbes said was that social order depended in an unspoken contract between citizens and the sovereign ruler. And the sovereign ruler is there to provide law and security for all, but there will be no society in absence of this ruler. If there is no ruler, we end up in whatever he called the state of nature, which was a perpetual state of war, where it would be like a dog eat dog kind of world, which is not very different from the one we actually live right now, if I may be honest. If we continue to evaluate um, how humans organize, the theory of social economic organization, politics as a vocation, and class status and party from Max Weber are a beautiful trilogy that, sorry, got a little lost. Oh, yes. A beautiful trilogy that will expand on your definitions of power and authority and the different kinds of authority. And it's not only just explaining that power is in reality an opportunity for one man to carry out their will through communal action, as we had already said, but it's also accepted power and the types of accepted power, like traditional authority, which would be like elders from a tribe or religious leaders that from a church. These authorities just have been there for too long and no one will bring them down. They are part of tradition, right? And then we have also modern authority. And in modern authority, we have two ways that it's given legitimacy. One is by the rational legal state, which is the bureaucratic state, a system that is dependable and that can repeat itself and that is supposedly unbiased, but it's not in reality, right? And a charismatic leader or a charismatic authority at the head of it, which is your typical Pierre Trudeau, right? A leader that evokes feelings of something extraordinary, something more than what it is. A charismatic leader does not stay in power for long because perceived image is a very unstable base into which to sustain power. So this might not be the strongest form of authority. Now, Harminder, it's your turn, and he will explain to us democratic will formation. And yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Marvin. George, the first book we are going to talk about is George Simon's Anarchism, Anarchist ideology and the working class movement in Spain during the period of 1868 to 1899. So George Richard Sherman has produced a concise yet comprehensive study of the development of the ideology of Nazism in Spain around the period of 1868 and 1899, 98. Sorry. So his work was valuable addition to English literature, both for the people interested in liberal left and for those with an interest in modern history of the Spain. Sermon's main point is to challenge the um, miscellaneous interpretations of Nazism most familiar to English speaker from Eric Hobsbawm's classic primitive rebels on the grounds that large parts of it do not withstand detailed analysis. So the next book we are going to talk about is uh, Pierre Joseph Proudhon's sorry for my pronunciation. Property is theft. So property is theft was slogan given by French anarchist Pierre Joseph Proudhon in his 1840s book What is Property? By property, Proudhon referred to the concept regarding land property that originated in Roman law. The sovereign right of property, the right to proprietors to do with his property as he please, to use and abuse. So long as in the end he submits the state-sanctioned title, Proudhon was clear that his opposition to property did not extend to exclusive possession of labor-made wealth. And the next book will be the emergence of Greek democracy, William Forrest, from 800 to 400 BC. So, the emergence of Greek democracy is William Forrest classic literature, which states evolution of Greek politics and interest most for the general readers and also for introductory classes in Greek history. It is in their best interest. It was the marvelous piece of work by George Forrest. Forrest speaks beautifully of informality, treats evidence fairly, and make complex issues seems clear. The next book is Discourse Ethics, Three Normative Models of Democracy, the Inclusions of Other Studies in Political Theories by Georgian Habermas. This volume presents Habermas' most recent contribution to ethical theory, expanding and clarifying his controversial theory of discourse ethics. The first chapter offers the comprehensive analysis of practicality, rationality, which establish a clear demarcation between pragmatic, ethical, and moral questions, and a corresponding differentiation between forms of volition and spheres of practicality discourse. Uh, Habermas, three normative models of democracy states that the liberal and republican models of democracy hold crucial flaws that do not make them viable, but a deliberative model is preferred. A deliberative model of democracy is a mix between the liberal or individual or republican or whole views of democracy. Habermas views a liberal democracy as one that places emphasis on issues facing the individuals, where person's status is determined by the extent of their negative rights. In contrast, the republican form of democracy places emphasizes on dealing with issues facing the community or society at large over the individual issues. This was the latest work by Habermas. So next slide, we are talking about radical right in Western Europe by Herbert Kichlet. The Radical Rights in Western Europe is the book written by Herbert Kichler uh, with the help of Anthony J. McCann. In this book, uh, Herberts defines the rise of new radical right parties has taken place due to shift in political spectra that distinguish between three forms of new radical political parties. The next book we are going to talk about is, so that was all. Thank you. And I'm hand overing to my partner, Mariel.
Thank you, Harminder. That was great. I'm really interested in anarchism. I think that I really like what they were talking is that anarchism also only exists when there's power to compare it to, and I think that is very interesting. We will continue with the decentering of the state. On these next books, I will examine the concept of decentering of the states by means of exemption politics, which is terrorism, war, empire, and, well, as we said, political exemptionism. This book is best exemplifies this theory because 4 chapters on the concept of sovereignty by Carl Schmitz state that authentic activity of politics is the sphere of the political. And this only becomes clear when these people have to make decisions in crisis, meaning going to war. And I mean, I will disclose later why I don't trust Carl Smith, but he obviously has a point, but there are things on his critical thinking that are a bit off, because even though the concept of politics as exemption is a legitimate reason and a way the law is kind of paused for a moment and temporarily suspended during a time of crisis so the executive leader can claim their power. And this is a current phenomena that occurs all around the world and continuously. It is now normalized, right? But Carl Smith is also a really toxic theories because he used this theory to how do I call it? Let me find, to justify, that is the word, to justify the German Nationalist Party on the suspension of the Weimar Constitution, which led to the Führersystem, or the principle of absolute leadership that characterized Adolf Hitler's dictatorship. So it's also always good to know which one of your old colonial theorists will also be not only right nationalists, but Nazis. So yeah. With that, we come to a completely different perspective, not Nazi at all. On Noam Chomsky, the Washington Connection and Third World Fascism, where he talks about the states of exemption that, as we talked about before, become the norm. And Noam Chomsky examines the violence as a product of non-state actors seeking radical political change by using tactics outside the norm. That means terrorists. So terrorists, what do? They challenge the state's legitimate monopoly over the use of force in territory. There are 3 distinct phenomena that are defined as terrorism in the contemporary age. One is the use of political violence as a means of revolt by non-state actors against a legitimate government. The second one is the use of political violence by governments themselves in contravention of national, international codes of human rights. And the third one would be the use of violence in war that contravenes established rules of engagement, including violence against civilians or non-military. So these three forms of terrorism are actually enforced by states and by non-state actors. So who are the bad guys anyway? Mm. On this is a masterpiece of political theory, On War by Karl von Clausewitz, where he talks about politics by other means, violence between politically distinct groups, and that is understood as armed conflicts that have been openly declared between or within states. This could be an example, for example, in Canada when they involved themselves in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2014, and they took in, they went to Afghanistan and they established themselves in an asymmetrical warfare, which is defined by the lack of symmetry between the sides of a violent military conflict. That is Canadian military having tons of budget and technology to horsepower, and the Taliban or armed conflict that doesn't have as much dollars in their bank accounts, right? And all this state of normalization of war has given us an era of post-security, an era where little violence is present everywhere, constantly. It's always potentially ready to be activated, ready to erupt. And this process involves an intensification of the division between outside terrorism and inside terrorism. And it demonizes the enemies, threatening each other and adding to the sense of conflict. I would also like to add these two books that talk about empire and the democracy in the age of empire by Antonio Negri and Michael Hart. This is another way in which sovereignty has been undermined, which is through the creation of a superstate. Forces like global capitalism and international trade agreements that reduce the decision-making abilities in national governments. And when these supranational forces become organized in a formal basis, the emergence of of empires as a type of political exception occurs. And it occurs in two definitions: as a geographically widespread of organization of individual states, nations, and people that is ruled by a central government, or, and this is a more modern definition, as a supranational global form of sovereignty whose territory is the entire globe and whose organization forms around nodes of a network of power who are allowed to police other dissident nations. So now they're forming, with all these organizations, they're forming a global empire, and war is only becomes a mean to police outside territories and undermining sovereignty. Right now, we can see it in how war is not fought between independent sovereign nation states, but as a kind of global state police and as proxy wars. And several states intervene on humanitarian or security grounds and suppress the dissidents, but they just go from one part to the other. It's more a business than actually a politic. With this, we will now go on and analyze these theories through a theoretical perspective. Let's start with functional structuralism. So in functional structuralism by Talcott Pearson, obviously the politics exist to perform a specific function, right? And they have to meet certain needs that the society has. The means on attending collective desirable goals and being the site of collective decision making. That is what politics is. But the thing is that if the government is existing to please people and give them what they need, who is to say no or yes? I think there is a very big flaw in this theoretical point of view. There is, though, a dominant functionalist framework, the pluralist theory, which says that society is made up of numerous competing interest groups, and their goals are diverse and often incompatible. And government and the state is responsible for distributing it evenly, and no group can really obtain the power for a long time and dominate the entire society. That's the way it self-regulates. The state of government has to act as a neutral mediator to negotiate this. And I don't think it is. I don't think the government is a neutral negotiator. So I wouldn't agree with this theory at all. Back to you, Harminder.
Yeah. So the next point we are talking about is critical sociology. As Marxist tradition dictates, the power of the state is principally understood as a means by which the economic power of capital is exercised and maintained. But Marx and Eagles put it in the Communist Manifesto differently. Sorry about that. Differently. Executive of the modern states is but a community for managing the common affairs of all bourgeois. In an analysis, Nikos Poltas confirms that the state performs a key role in maintaining the interrogations of capitalist society. Both have the different idea, but they are defending their views. Accumulation function in which the state maintains the economic condition for sustained capitalist investment and profitability, and legitimation function in which the state promotes the legitimacy of the social order, including the inequalities and power structures, and secures social harmony and the consent of public to be ruled. And the third and the last point they are arguing is a coercive function in which the debate is in the last instance the state intervenes by use of force or to repress sources of social unrest and disorder.
Our next theory that we're going to analyze is the feminist theory with Catherine McKinnon, who wrote Towards a Feminist Theory of the State. Now, she says that feminism really has no theory of the state, but that feminism has like a weird relationship with the state in which it can be an ally for addressing feminist concern, but other times it can be also an important mechanism for maintaining patriarchal power and oppression. So an important advancement in women in the state and feminism in the state is the formation of the status of women committees, which later on became an establishment of the Royal Commission of the Status of Women. And this was very good because it made the private issues of women a state issue. So it took out unpaid labor from private lives into a state issue. It took out sexual equality, maternity, access to birth control, reproductive rights, and it shone a light through the feminist lens, and it just gave women a better chance to go outside and combat oppression, right? The state has historically oppressed women, and a history of family and sexual policies that has reinforced women unpaid labor. And with these laws and the challenging of these laws, we can understand how concrete the experience of everyday sexual inequality is and try to combat it. Yeah, with that, I leave you with Harminder again with symbolic interactionism.
Yeah. Symbolical interactionism uh, is a sociological theory that develops from practical consideration and alludes to particular effect of communication and interaction in people to make images and normal implications for deduction and correspondence with others. Other sociologists study government and power by relying on framework of symbolic interactionism, which is grounded in the works of Marx Webner and George H. Mead. In other words, excuse me.
Yeah.
In other words, it is a frame of reference to better understand how individuals interact with one another to create symbolic words, and in return, how these words shape individuals' behavior. It is also a framework that helps us to understand how society is preserved and created through repeated interactions between individuals. The interpretations process that occurs between the interactions help create and reinforce meaning. In perspective, symbolic interactionism are interested in ongoing creations of symbols that give meanings to political life and activities. But as micro sociologists, we must pay attention on relational, personal, and in the face-to-face aspects of politics. These aspects plays a huge role in forming the politics game. Much of politics consists of face-to-face backroom meetings and lobbyists' efforts. So that is the symbolic function interactionism. Back to you, Mariel. And yeah, you are muted.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
We should definitely pay attention to that. I wanted to add some thoughts. So we think that a comprehensive analysis of power, authority, and sovereignty would include the First Nation history and their forms of organization. And we were wondering why maybe our textbook did not include that, since I mean, obviously natives did not congregate the same way that Western government has congregated, but that doesn't mean that they don't have valid forms of organization. So I would also like to learn about that.
Yeah, definitely.
And we also believe that this analysis, sorry for the misspelling right there, that this analysis lacks of considering corruption as a phenomena that occurs and that interacts with the concepts of power and sovereignty. And we do believe that it's very important to, in the future, consider the phenomena of corruption, as it is very widespread. What would you say?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you for watching our presentation and have a good
That will
night.
be all. We will be signing out. Peace.
Peace out.